Hey guys, Veronica here. So I've been getting a lot of questions about mid-season pruning. Specifically, is it too late for me to prune? Should I prune at some point? I don't know what I'm doing with my peppers. So I just wanted to cover some of these questions and go over various methods and techniques that I think could potentially apply or be adapted depending on where you live. One of the things you really need to think about and keep in mind when you're deciding to prune in the middle of the summer is how many more days do you have that are frost free, because your first frost is going to determine if you're able to get another harvest off your plants or finish the harvest that is currently in process. So we're going to go over all of that. So the first thing that I want to show you is I finally managed to plant two of the same plants side by side. I had picked out some serranos at the nursery earlier this year and wanted to do this side-by-side comparison because it's something I get asked a lot, like, does pruning even matter that much? And I honestly think it does, but I'll show you and you can decide, if it's something you want to incorporate in your gardening practices or not. So here on this pepper that's closer to me is the plant that I pruned earlier in the season, and as you can see, it has a lot of foliage. It's really leafing out. It's starting to develop a lot of serrano peppers, and the stem portion of it is probably about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. So it's getting a good stocky base. It's also starting to fall over because the peppers are a little heavy on top, and I didn't go back through and continue pruning or training it at all. So a lot of this space has been hands off because I've been very focused on the field and the forest, and this was sort of just nice little normal garden with compost and mulch and whatnot to have some peppers and tomatoes this summer. But this guy is branching out well, and there's more flowers on the way, and I really don't want to prune it at this point because it's just starting to become really productive. So with this guy, what we're going to do is stake it instead. Now, the one that's a little further away from me, and I'll pull this so you can see it, you can see that this is the further away plant. And while it's very upright, the stem is actually about maybe 1/3 to 1/2 the size of the stem on this one. It had a few peppers on it when I first purchased it, and for the sake of it being sort of a control plant, I decided not to remove anything, and we harvested those peppers, and it's just starting to push a few more flowers, but overall it's been kind of chilling and not productive in this space. So my thought process on this is that because this one got cut back fairly severely early on, it decided to push out more roots and try and push more fruit, because the whole goal of most of the vegetables we grow is to reproduce and die. And since it wasn't allowed to reproduce based on the flowers and fruit that were on it when I planted it, it decided to really like go big or go home, which is exactly what it's doing. Whereas this guy already had some peppers growing earlier in the season, so it just was able to chill, because it's like, I got my seeds covered, like we're good, we're just going to hang out here. So on that one, we're going to do some pruning, but first I want to show you how I stake these guys if I'm not going to prune them and I really want the flowers and fruit that are on it to continue developing. There's no wrong answer here as far as which method you choose. It really is about just looking at your plant, thinking about your season and how many days you have left in order for peppers to ripen, and then going from there. So I've got a couple of fruit wood prunings. If you watched my video on composting, there's a lot of sticks that get set next to the compost bin because I'm stripping the leaves off these branches that I've pruned, and then I'm not usually composting the branches because they take too long. But if you get a nice long branches and you're pruning, what you can do instead of spending $1 a pop on bamboo sticks at the big box store is you can just hang on to those branches, and then what I'll do is I will just shove them in around the plant, and I'll start building a tripod. And I do this instead of just putting one next to the plant and tying the plant, because I find that this is there's a lot less breakage that happens when it has support on multiple sides. So especially if you're in a high wind area, being able to support it almost like a tomato cage, but without that additional expense. And just like a very natural looking sort of thing in your garden. So I'll try and push these kind of equal distance to make a little triangle shape and get them down in the ground pretty well. You can use a tomato cage if you have one. I don't have any here. So I'll push those in, and then I'll get my trusty dollar store wire. You can get 2 packs of this for $1. It's kind of crazy, but it comes with a dispenser and cutter and everything, so it's a nice thing to have around if you're doing a lot of trellising and training. And then I just tie these together right here at the top. You can use string, you can use dental floss, you could use the twisty off a bread bag. Like, I just like my little wire dispenser. It's the only thing in this whole operation right here that's not just not compostable. So I'll pull those off often at the end of the season and use them again. And that's basically it for the little cage that I build for these guys. So that should keep this guy upright and from falling over too much. I may come in and like weave these branches to support him as I watch how the wind blows. But it should keep it from falling over too much for the duration of the season. And then I may come back in here later and, prune out a couple of branches to try and push another flush off of it. As I break pieces, so that one will come out. If you have stuff that breaks, just prune it, because you don't want those broken pieces just chilling, but I didn't lose too much, so we're good. And so this guy, now you can see, if the wind blows it, it's going to stay upright, and it's not going to be an entire post. Like, if you just put one with it and then tie it, a lot of times what happens is that will get blown over with it. Unless you're really staking it deep down in the ground, and then you may be damaging the roots in the process. So highly recommend building them a little tripod like this, because that just seems to be a much sturdier cage for them. Now, what if you don't want to stake them? What if you're looking to get more production? You've already harvested a large crop and you want a bumper crop. They're not doing anything, and they're just like kicking it in your garden and not really growing or producing for you. That's when we bust out the pruners. So now we're going to move over to this other guy over here, the one that was not pruned, and we're going to talk about pruning it. So I learned a new term this week. It's called retuning, and I saw someone using it when it comes to vegetables, which I thought was very interesting, because I've always called it mid-season pruning for bumper crop production, which is a total mouthful, so it's nice to have a terminology for it. But it comes from the sugarcane industry, and what they do is they'll basically go through and they harvest, and they'll cut the sugarcane at or just above the soil line and leave the roots in the ground. And what happens is more canes will push through the ground, and then they're able to get maybe a second or even third harvest off of that. Now, we're not going to cut this pepper all the way to the ground, because that's just not a prudent decision when you have a plant that only has a few more months to produce and needs to photosynthesize. It is much wiser to cut it 6 to 8 inches above the ground, which is what I generally do when I'm cutting back peppers at this point in the season. Now, why would you cut back peppers at this point in the season? Say you've already got a full harvest off of it and it's starting to slow down, you're not seeing a lot of flowers or buds forming. Maybe you have just a lazy plant like this guy. You're not lazy, I'm just kidding, but maybe it's like just chilling and it's happy chilling, and you need to, give it a little bit of stress in order to make it more productive. Maybe it's starting to, get very tall and gangly. And so there's all of these different reasons when you're looking at your plants and assessing them and trying to decide if you should prune them or not, that you should keep in mind, as well as how many days do you have until your first frost. Here we still have about 3 months, so I'm not worried about them being able to be productive in that period of time, because it's going to stay fairly warm up until that point at the beginning of November, and then we'll get a cold snap. But there should be enough frost-free days that are warm enough to still set more flower buds and still ripen the fruit in that period of time. So if you are going through a heat wave right now, if your plants are looking, kind of like garbage because it's been so hot and you're seeing buds drop, that's a perfect time to do this sort of pruning method and really let that plant build up more strength again at the root zone. You are going to want to feed it, but we're going to get in here and we're going to prune this guy. So one of the things that I look for when I'm going to prune at this point in the season is there foliage down in the space where I'm pruning to? I want to make sure that there's leaves left. You want, some people will say like 2 or 3, but honestly, like keep a dozen or 2 at minimum leaves on that plant in order for it to be able to photosynthesize enough so that it can keep growing and potentially push a bumper crop before frost. But I'll look at it. I always want to keep it above the browner part of the stem. So at some point in the season, peppers usually get sort of this like bark, almost like tree bark looking part. And so I'll keep the cuts above that, because I look to that as like the point of real strength. And if I start cutting into that, then I think this is going to dry out too fast, and you want to avoid as many problems and opportunities to kill your plants as possible. So we're just going to do haircuts instead. But I don't go, try and cut it down to one main stem or anything like that. Like, I'm really just looking at this from a shape perspective to try and get it to bush out. And then if it gets too dense in the middle from leaves because of that, I may go in and thin it, but it's not always necessary. So it really is on a plant by plant basis. But what I'm going to do with this guy is I'll look and try and find, 2 or 3 leaf nodes up each stem that I want to cut. Now I know I want to take the stem out that has the flowers, because that's going to send a signal to the rest of the plant that there are no flowers on it, and it really needs to, get its butt in gear and start producing again if it's going to survive this season in the form of seeds. So we'll cut this guy right here. Yeah, this is like the 3rd node on this one. So I'll take that one out immediately. This one we're going to try and root, because that's another thing you guys ask me. So we're going to hit that at the end of this video. But that one comes out. I may take this one. I can see new growth on the back side, and I like the way that the top is branching. So what I'm going to do is just trim off the bits that are starting to bud, which seems really counterintuitive, but I want it to push flowers all over, because basically what I'm thinking is that the plant goes, something's eating all of those, like, let's double down and go for broke. And that's sort of the reaction that I want here. So I'll trim off or pinch off a lot of the buds at this point, and then just try and look for some amount of symmetry. Now, there are other growers, if you've had really big production, or if your plant is, really strong and healthy looking, they will trim it down to just a central leader. Not a lot of foliage, just leaving a few leaves here and there. But I think that the more you can leave that's still really healthy, the better, because that plant's going to recover a little more quickly. So I will go in and I'm just going to cut all of these like top buds off of, not all of them, but a lot of them. And then I'm going to trim a little bit of stuff that's close to the soil line, just because there's some concern about disease as the weather heats up. Although in here they're looking pretty good. So, and that's basically it. You could take more of it than that. And I'll take that piece off too. But you just want to do enough, cut back just enough to really let it kind of stress out a little, but not too much. So a little bit of healthy stress on these plants is not a bad thing. I'm also looking, you see me kind of like poking at it as I'm working, like I'm looking to see sort of where the branches are positioned, because that's going to determine, how it grows out from there. Everywhere that you cut, it's going to, if you're cutting above a node, then it's going to push out at that node. If you're cutting below the node, then it'll push out in the other direction. I don't know if that actually made sense, but basically looking at the branching structure, looking to see, where is it crowding itself. I'm going to take this out too, because that's just not very even. But that's pretty much it. You could, on this guy, like I could take those pieces off and take those pieces off and take that off and like leave it fairly naked. But I don't really like to do that to my plants. I like to see them recover. If I don't see buds in the next week or two, I may go back and prune a little bit more off of it. But I'm not looking at doing like super hard prunings on a lot of these. I'm just looking to see like what is the minimal amount that I can do in order to push some production. So there's those guys. Now we're going to take this piece, even though it has flower buds, and root it, because that's the biggest stem that I have. And we're going to have to go to the woods to do that, actually, because that's where all of my aloe is. So we're going to go to the nursery, and I'm going to try a new method that I've been reading about, that there are quite a few cannabis growers that are very happy with it. And so because they generally are leading the way in terms of gardening techniques, I wanted to test it out. So let's go to the woods. So now I'm in the nursery because, like I said, that's where my aloe is hiding. I haven't figured out all of the spots I want to plant this yet, so I have a couple of pots in here. I've been using it a lot as far as seed starting and rooting cuttings and just general watering and maintenance, and it's been pretty fantastic results, to be honest. So I wanted to try this out. I've got the big branch that we cut off of that pepper plant just now, and I'm going to pinch off basically all of these bits that have buds. Sometimes people will cut leaves off too, but I think that I'm mostly just going to worry about flower buds this time. And I'm going to put this inside so that it has a good temperature to work with. But what I'll do is I'll just take one of these aloe leaves, usually the lowest one. I'm going to see if I can just pop it off versus cutting it. Yes. And so I'll just pop it out of that plant. And then I'm going to take that. Actually, I'm going to cut it across the top just to have a nice clean opening. And then I'm going to trim this again because it's been sitting drying out while we're chattering on about, all of this stuff. I'm going to get it a nice clean angle there at the base. And then I'm just going to stick it straight into this piece of aloe. And like I said, this was something that I've seen in a couple of the growing forums. And I'm always looking to various growers to see what techniques they're doing. But I thought this was really fascinating because it's just inundating this plant with enzymes and all kinds of good stuff, plus the moisture that it needs to grow. And it's in an antibacterial environment because of the aloe. So we'll see what happens, and if it works out or not. But if you have any questions about the pruning process and anything else, please leave them in the comments below. If you are the sort of person that really wants to send a picture, I've done this for friends, but I'm opening it up to just like general public, and you want to support me on Patreon, you can send me pictures, and I will actually go through and circle the areas that I would recommend pruning in just basically any plant, and kind of try and talk you through that process. I am opening that up to all new Patreon members for the rest of July. So head over to Patreon to join and sign up and add your support and get a little bit more help in this space. If you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button, ding that bell. Don't miss a single episode because I'm always trying to help you guys, solve your problems in the garden. There's lots of Q&As that are coming up here in the near future. Always answering questions on Instagram as well. So if it's not a very specific question, it's just a general, like, I want to see this or that, or, how do you go about doing this or that, then follow me on Instagram at FlavorKit. And until next time, happy gardening.